Hi there, it's Emma here from First in Architecture. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to talk about site analysis. Specifically, we are going to look at carrying out the desktop study. The reason we start with a desktop study rather than just jumping straight into going to our site visit is there's a lot of information we can gather before we go that will prepare us to find the information we're looking for on site. So we kind of arrive more well informed. We've maybe identified specific things that we want to look at while we go on our site visit, and possibly also find out things that we may need to take with us as a result of our desktop study. So there are a few things we can do to get prepared. There is a lot of information we can find out while sitting at our desk, and it may be sometimes that we're not able to visit the site, so the desktop study is even more important in that case. So let's jump in and take a look at the kind of information we'll be looking for as we carry out our desktop study. One of the main features of the desktop study is looking at the location. So by location we're talking about where the site is, the orientation of the site. Is it facing north? We can look at the general size of the site, where the boundaries are, start to get an idea of the context, what buildings are surrounding the site, what's the land like, is it agricultural, is it urban. We can start to understand how the site is accessed. That's literally how is it accessed, where is there a driveway, is there an entrance already, but also how it's accessed from further afield, so we can start looking at traffic information. Is there public transport nearby? We can also start to gain an understanding of what the vegetation is like in the area and within the site itself. So is there a lot of trees there? Is it overgrown? Is there going to be a diverse kind of ecology there? We also start to get an understanding of the type of soil that might be on the site, or the rock. Some geological information would be really useful to us. We can start collecting aerial photographs, satellite images. There's a lot of information you can get from places like Google Maps and Bing Maps. We can also start to get an understanding of things like site levels if we're fortunate enough to have a topographical survey. So there is a lot we can get just from sitting at our desk when it comes to discovering the location information of the site. So let's jump over to Safari and have a look at that. Okay, so we're starting off with Google Maps. Obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with Google Maps, but I'll just show you a few things that you may not be aware of. So we've just got a standard map here. If I come over to the left-hand side and open up the options here, we can turn on the traffic for starters. This is quite useful to understand the traffic flows around your site, etc, etc. But another thing that's really cool, if you go down to the middle at the bottom here, instead of having live traffic information, we can have typical traffic information. So we can actually see what the traffic is like at different times of the day. So let's say, for example, on a Friday evening, and then let's say, for example, on a Sunday morning, we can see the differences. So that's quite useful. Then, of course, we can change it to satellite view. We can turn off that traffic and we can put cycle routes on. I'll change back to standard view just so you can see the cycle routes. So again, this is really useful, understanding access to a site and things like that. We've got the different types of trails or dedicated cycle lanes and things like that. So that's another really useful one. We've also got terrain, which on this part of the map it doesn't show up very well, but if we go to somewhere that's got more of a varied terrain, you can see that here. So again, this can be quite useful. And then of course we've got street view. Let's just zoom in here a little bit. Let's go right into the center. Going to drag our little guy. And what's quite useful about Street View, I'm sure you've already used it before, but there's a hidden little thing here up at the top where we can change what the date was that the Street View was taken. So this is quite useful for finding some historical data. It doesn't go back that far, but nonetheless it does give us a bit of historical stuff that can be quite useful if there's been new developments happening in the area. So you can just drag this little thing along to see the changes that have been made. So yeah, that's quite useful. Let's move on to Bing Maps now. Over on Bing Maps, less options on here. It's still quite useful. The thing I find the most useful on Bing Maps is the Ordnance Survey. So if we come up to the right hand side, click on Ordnance Survey. This is good for footpaths predominantly, and it just shows the information in a slightly different way. So for a site analysis, this can be a really handy little tool. And then of course they also have the aerial view, and this view can be slightly different to what you see on Google. So sometimes the information on here is more useful than the information on Google. Something that Bing Maps used to do, but I don't think they do it anymore, is they used to do a really good kind of bird's eye view, but I don't think they do that, which is a shame because you could get some really interesting angles from there. So moving on from Bing Maps, we've got Google Earth. So let's go and take a look at Google Earth. Okay, so Google Earth is actually a separate app. It's not viewed within your web browser. So let's just start taking a look at what we've got here. So some of the things that Google Earth can do that Google Maps can't do. It's got a few little tips up here. So up on this toolbar we've got another historical option. This goes back much further than the Street View that I showed you just a minute ago. Okay, so the timeline is a really good example of how things have changed. So if we look at this area here, if we take this timeline back to the 2000s, you can see a lot of these properties weren't even built, and a lot of this development hadn't happened. So this can be a useful little tool just to see how the landscape's changed over time, and it's a very visual way of demonstrating that information, so that's quite useful. It also has a sunlight option. I don't really think this is a great one. I wouldn't use it myself. You've obviously got your aerial views, but we also have a 3D buildings view. The best way to show that is by going to London. Obviously not all of the areas have the 3D, but if you are doing a site in a well-known area, sometimes you can get some cool stuff. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and use the mouse, and then we can see some of the 3D buildings. So again, you can get some cool effects. You can turn off some of the labels and things like that, so that you've just got the 3D information there, and that looks pretty good. You've also got terrain, so I'm going to come away from London. I'm going to come over onto the left hand side and turn on the terrain. It takes a while to just populate. Let's go somewhere that's a little bit more hilly. Don't know why I'm going over to Norfolk. Okay, so let's have a look down here. And you can see this gives us quite a good example of what the terrain's like in this area, which can be quite effective. So that's one for Google Earth that's worth messing around with. And finally, let's just have a little look at the measure tool. Okay, so for the measure tool, let's for argument's sake say that our site is this playing field, which wouldn't be very popular, and we're going to click on the show ruler tool here. We've got loads of options, so we can measure a line, we can measure a path, we can measure a polygon, which will then give us the acreage as well. So let's start with that one. So I've got polygon selected, and I'm just going to start drawing a shape around the site. Obviously I'm doing this very rough, and you do have to be mindful that this is rough, but it is nonetheless very useful. So it's working it out as we go around. It's worked out the perimeter in meters and the area of the site, 7 acres, and you can change your units. This is a really good little tool. I think it's probably underused. So you can have a little experiment with that as well, and see if you can sort of gather more information from using Google Earth. So before we move on to the next section, I just wanted to briefly show you a couple of websites that are really useful for climate information. The first one is the Met Office. They have a section called Climate Averages. So you can type in your location. So I seem to have focused in on Retford so far, so let's just go with that. So it's already coming up, nearest climate stations to Retford, so let's go with this one. And this is going to provide us with a lot of data, averages, tables, graphs, rainfall, all sorts of things. So it's worth checking out that. Another one is called Weather and Climate. If we just search for a destination, let's go for Sheffield. Again, this gives us some nice graphs, lots of information, sunshine, rainfall, etc., etc. So those are a couple of sites that you'll find quite useful as you try and collect your climate data for your site. The next thing we can start to collect is a lot of legal information and data with regard to our sites. So that sort of consists of things like rights of way. You know, is there a public footpath running through the site? Is there particular rights of access? Are there any planning restrictions on the site? Is it in a green belt? Is there any planning history on the site that we should know about? What is the historical use of the site? So was it used for industrial purposes before, or could it be on contaminated land? Is the site in a conservation area? Is it in an area of outstanding natural beauty, a national park? Is there any historical significance locally in the area, or cultural significance that we should know about? And are there any sort of developmental controls on the site? So perhaps planning conditions or controls that have been put in place in the past. We also need to consider things like trees. Are there any preservation orders on any of the trees? Will we be able to remove trees? Do we want to remove the trees? Massive amount of information that we can find out from this. So once again, let's head over to Safari and just have a little look at some of the things we can find out. Okay, so we're going to have a quick look at the planning side of things. I'm going to try and keep this brief. I'm conscious that this video is going to be quite long. So if we type in Retford Council, we can see that it falls under Bassetlaw. So let's go to Bassetlaw District Council. We want to go into the planning section. Planning services. All council websites will be slightly different, but a lot of them contain a lot of information that will be really useful for you as you carry out your desktop study. So you can look at the online planning applications, so you can see applications that have already been put in, so you could see perhaps what has been put in for your particular site or in the surrounding area. But they also have a lot of guidance as well, things like conservation and heritage, neighbourhood plans, things like that. So it's really worth spending some time on the local council website where your site is located and finding out some of the information about how the planning works in that area, because it does vary from location to location. On the blog post that accompanies this video, we've got loads more links to lots of useful websites, so please take a moment to head over to First in Architecture and have a look. The link will be in the description for this video. So let's head back and just finish off. So I hope that gives you a good overview of some of the information you can be getting before you start heading out on your site visit. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and check the description for further information, and make sure you check out the rest of this site analysis series, and I'll catch up with you soon.